D&D Beyond now fits in the palm of your hand with the free D&D Beyond app. It's the perfect tool set for beginners, regular players, and seasoned dungeon masters. Play faster with the guided character creator and access your character sheets, spells, and abilities wherever you go. All of your adventures and source books are at your fingertips, even when you're offline. Easily find and access the rules you need when you need them. With more features to come, download the free D&D Beyond app today.
For those of you just joining us, I am here talking with Dan Dillon, one of the writers of Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and we have been talking all about amazing monster goodness, and I want to dig in a little bit more about that in terms of design. How does a setting like Ravenloft inspire your monster design process? What makes it so special?
Right. Well, I've hit a couple of these points as we were talking through these individual horrible examples of delightfulness that Ravenloft has to offer, and you really start thinking about the mood that you want to evoke with whenever these monsters show up. You think about what is everything that's going to come with this monster when you fight it. It might be a stand-up slugfest. You can do those. It's good to have simple sort of just smash and grabs or whatever. But whenever you're designing a creature in Ravenloft, you really want to bring home that these are the domains of dread. These are places that are tailored, bespoke prisons for whatever Dark Lord is trapped within them. And that's kind of the thing that you always want to come back to. So a lot of these are tied very specifically to a domain and whatever the torment there is. It's always fun to think about, you want these to be useful generally, but some of them are very specific, like the Vampiric Mind Flayer. And you think about what story is where this monster resides and where it originates from. What story is it telling? And then how can you pull just little elements, not even necessarily to be completely in your face about it, but just pluck at the strings of those stories to keep those discordant notes ringing.
I heard pluck at the strings of the stories, and my mind went straight to the carionettes and the terrifying.
Oh yeah, they're awful.
Puppet possibilities.
Yep, who doesn't love a good body swap with a puppet?
I mean, it's speaking of possibilities. We're all a bit enchanted with the carionettes, possibly to our own ultimate detriment when we make terrible bargains.
Fantastic.
But can you tell us about some of the unique features and mechanics for Ravenloft monsters? Did you all sort of, some of them, as we discussed earlier with the werewolf mechanics, crossing over, did you sort of group, pool, brainstorm some of this stuff, or sort of borrow from each other, or how did it work?
Sure. We work pretty closely with one another when we design anything, monsters in particular. So there were a few of us set the task of creating the drafts for these. So we had regular, sort of co-working sessions where we would get on a call, because this was all done remote, which was that was new and interesting. So we would hop into a video call, and we would sometimes share a screen, sometimes we would work in the same document through document sharing, and we would just kind of jam on what we wanted things to be. So it wasn't necessarily that we were grabbing like, here's an ability from one thing and we're going to go put it in the other thing, but there was a lot of crosstalk about how we're thinking about these monsters and riffing the ideas up from a little line on a spreadsheet to this full-blown beautiful horrible thing you have to throw at your players in your book. We collaborated heavily on what these would feel like and how the fights would feel while you're encountering one of these.
I know the book's only been out a week so far, but how has the response been? Have you heard anything interesting yet about any of your monster children out in the world?
Oh man, the response to this book has been overwhelmingly positive, and just people are loving it. They're digging into so many of the little aspects here and there that are scattered through the monsters, the dark gifts, just the themes of the domains and the dark lords, and then the tools like curses and the fear and stress, and hearing people just gush about whatever gem kind of caught their eye. It's just given me life. I'm loving it. Everybody's coming up with so many good ideas, and not even just to run Ravenloft or horror, but like things that they've decided, hey, I want to rip this and pull it into my home game that's set in Eberron or wherever, right? Yeah, those are super cool.
I would love to ask in general about how monster design works. I was alluding at the top of the stream to the fact that that is not something I have done a ton of. Even when I've DM'd, I tended to grab ready-mades most of the time. So I'd love to
Sure.
hear what's fun about designing monsters, first off.
Oh man. So for me, the biggest thing is thinking about what is this monster going to sort of do to the game and the narrative around it when it shows up? Like, how is this fight going to feel? What is it going to look like? What is it going to, what are your characters going to feel when they're facing this thing down in a life or death battle, or even in a tense parlay, right? Because some of these you don't necessarily need to fight them. You could maybe negotiate with the body taker plant. It speaks deep speech. It's telepathic. It's intelligent. It has wants and desires. You might be able to talk it down or barter with it, buy it off. Go whatever way works for your table. Those options are there. And so when I'm creating a monster, that's where I start. How do I want this to feel? What stories is it going to hook into initially? And I start from I'm a very visual person, so I think movies, I think comic books, I think splash art, I think what is this cool set piece that I'm going to see in my mind's eye as I'm fighting this thing. And that's where I sort of start when I have a monster concept. What is that awesome battle snapshot going to look like? And then I start kind of grabbing pieces of it and pulling those concepts and trying to figure out how to make the mechanics work to reinforce that.
That's amazing. You're playing to my biases because I am a comic book person very much, and the key to a lot of
Awesome.
splash pages, especially if they're action based, is that they should be a moment that is both significant in story and visually striking. So trying to
Yeah.
find that combo and then reverse engineer what might be going on there is such a smart approach. But it doesn't
Yeah.
sound like it would
Thanks.
be easy. What's challenging about monster design?
Oof. Yeah, it is not easy. This is definitely a balancing act. One of the biggest things that I personally have to watch out for is I get into designer brain mode and I just want to start digging in and writing all the things. And you've got this, and maybe there's a table for different stuff it can do. And it's got these 5 action. Like rein it in. A poor DM has to be able to look at this thing and then use it at the table. And you don't want them reading and cross-referencing and all that fun stuff. So finding your balance between cool, evocative abilities and things it can use maybe every round, maybe every couple of rounds, and then marrying that to ease of play and ease of use and just the user experience of making this thing go at your table. Because nothing turns a DM off more than looking at a giant page of just numbers and just gobbledygook text and trying to think, how do I even use this? Like, that's a non-starter. That monster to me has missed the mark right out of the gate. And so for me, I have to be very vigilant and not let myself over design things and just keep it right down simple and punchy. And that takes practice. It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of restraint and a lot of just playing with things and seeing what works and what doesn't.
What do you wish that people knew about designing monsters?
So along the lines of considering usability at the table, one of the things you have to watch out for, and this is something that I'm very guilty of from my early freelance monster designing and making stuff for my own home games, where I get, that's where most of us as designers get started, just making stuff while we're running games. And it's easy to, you go through all the numbers, you're hitting all the challenge rating calculations, everything is working out. But when you use it in play, it's like, ugh, this monster was so boring. Well, it's a giant pile of hit points. It's super easy to hit, but it took 15, 20, 30 hits to be able to drop the thing. And then when it attacks, it swings twice and hits like a wet noodle. It's just not exciting, right? It just turns into a slog fest. So you can make all of the numbers work per the challenge rating calculator. It's going to spit back the challenge that you want. But then once you get it in play, it takes a feel, it takes practice and experience and a feel for figuring out where those levels actually are, where you can tweak something down to bring something else up. And that's actually going to increase your fun output to think of it as a machine. And it's easy to get bogged down in the numbers and forget about how it's going to feel. And so I've seen
What
a
are
lot
those?
of, suggestions. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say a lot of suggestions I've seen for, I want a monster to do X. I look at that and I go, do you really? Because that might not be fun for your players to deal with for 8 rounds, that sort of thing.
I love that. So one of the signals that you're talking about is a sense that the battle has grown maybe repetitive, if you have a giant
Mhm.
pile of hit points. What are the other sort of signals that you tune into that you sort of learned over time? Like, I can tell that was exciting, or I can tell that was a misfire. Is there something you've seen in your players that tells you that, or is it your feeling running them, or both?
Both for sure. And one of the biggest signals you'll get from your players, though, is if they stop describing their actions and what they're doing, and they just sort of slip into "I attack, I hit, 6 damage," and that's just sort of where their turn is. That pops a red flag for me. That means they're disengaging, right? They are just in numbers mode at that point. And if you've lost the narrative and you're in pure numbers, something needs to be adjusted. And that's where, if you're DMing at that point, that's where I'm like, maybe this thing is only has 5 hit points left instead of 50, you know?
I love that. I love that, especially if it's a change from like the way they started out
Yeah.
behaving a certain way and you've seen them switch over. And I did love a lot of the tips at the front of the monsters chapter, which was sort of like, have them bite people's faces for no reason because that's just creepy. Why not?
Yep.
That's going to stick with me.
Yep. Yeah, shake up their behaviors. Give them some just weird spookiness.
I would love to drill in a little bit more about something you mentioned. How did you
Mhm.
get started as a designer? You sort of alluded to it, but what's the formal answer? How did Dan Dillon go from "I like to play games, Teen Dan is very happy with Ravenloft" to Dan Dillon, writer for Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft?
Sure. My path to becoming a professional game designer, my initial steps aren't really a thing anymore. So apologies to anyone out there looking to take notes. So I had a friend who actually won a game design contest. And so as a result of that, he got to create an adventure for an actual company's actual play program. And that sort of springboarded into him doing freelance work for various other TRPG publishers. And he was talking about this on Facebook and just sort of talking about his projects. And I just kept just like coming up with wacky ideas and just like throwing them at his threads, kind of just to be a nuisance. And it got to the point where he was like, okay, you either need to stop and realize that I'm going to steal these ideas and put them in this book, or you need to come write them for the book. And so I kind of stopped and went, oh, I could write them for the book. And so that's how I got my first freelance uh, game design gig. And then it just sort of snowballed from there. And, working for third-party publishers like Rogue Genius Games, Cobalt Press, yeah, a lot of folks out there.
Well, and I will say, while the specific forms may change all the time, there's always going to be people out there working on new games and coming up with ideas and meeting up to bounce things off of each other. So I think that's still great advice. Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, now if you can't find if you don't want to break into the doing freelance work for someone else, there's always publishing your own stuff, right? Blogs are easier than ever. The DMs Guild is a thing that exists that gives you a lot of tools to create and publish your own things. Any sort of medium where you can create something and then put it out there for people to get eyes on and then maybe use in their games, give you some feedback. That's how it starts. If you want to do it, just start taking stuff that you've created and getting it out there.
What is the most fun part of the game design process, or the most fun stuff to work on?
Ooh, that it shifts a little bit, right? That ebbs and flows like the tide, and usually it has to do with whatever I happen to be working on now. That kind of becomes my focus point. So when I was doing monsters for Van Richten's, I was all about monster design. Let's see. I do a lot of monster design. I do a lot of player-facing mechanics. Certainly working on things like Tasha's. Let's see. What is my
Thank you
most
on behalf of the
enjoyable?
players.
Oh, well, yeah, you're very welcome. We're delighted that y'all enjoy it. My most fun things that I love to design are probably monsters, actually. That's probably my most fun. And then coming close on that is various player options. So getting into things like the dark gifts in Van
Tell us a
Richten's,
little
where
bit about
where I'm
working on Dark
super
Gifts, if you
blessed.
would.
Oh, sure. So, dark gifts are the concept that the dark powers of Ravenloft, these mysterious beings that sort of pull all the strings and run everything in the domains of dread, they might take an interest in you and offer you, or give you, sometimes maybe without offering, a measure of their power. But that power always comes with a price, a little barb, a little hook attached to it. So you might get a glimpse into some sort of truth around you where you hear the whispers of departed spirits or celestials or fiends or something. Some beings are surrounding you and whispering to you, and you can sort of use that to your advantage. But every now and then, maybe those whispers get too loud to ignore, and they distract you, and they shock you and startle you and frighten you at the wrong moment. That sort of thing. So those were a lot of fun to work on to create this this story framing for your character. Like this is going to mean something to a character that has it. So it starts with that. What story does this tell for the character that has this gift, and then what cool stuff does it give them, and then what price does it exact every now and then, or constantly, depending on which one you pick.
And I was very impressed by the tables for flavoring those things. I thought were by themselves once again just an inspiring instrument for me as a player to sort of look at like, right, you could have a similar effect from these very, very different causes, and each of them would create a different story impression. And that already sort of gets you out of your immediate assumptions about how things work. So thank you for those.
Awesome. I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, that's the point on those. They're supposed to be sort of a generic framework that you can very easily flavor in different ways. So like you could take the symbiotic being where you have another creature growing on or inside you or melded with you somehow. You could do that like as you have in, disembodied intelligence, sharing your head, whispering in your thoughts, or you could go full Vampire Hunter D, where you have a face on your hand that talks to you, and you could go either way with it.
A lot of very classic archetypes that map onto that one in really fun ways. Yep. What would you like to do next? And or I have to ask, because you alluded to it earlier, if Ravenloft is in a dead heat for favorite D&D setting, what's the other half?
Oh, yeah, sure. So my other favorite D&D setting of all time, Ravenloft is in a death grip with Al-Qadim, the sort of Middle Eastern inspired setting from second edition. I loved that. Loved the trappings and aesthetic of it. And, met some really great people in more recent years talking about it, even though it's an old 1990 thing with everything that comes with that. But I've met a fellow who lives in Saudi Arabia through the internet talking about Al-Qadim, Ahmed Al-Jabri. He does streaming about it. He's fantastic. 20 Arabia RPG, if you're interested, go follow him. He's great. I just love the aesthetic, the folklore connections, all that stuff, and talking to him and people like him about it and hearing them sort of go through some of the old material and talk about how they would use it in a modern campaign. Oh, love it. As for what I would like to work on, do you mean just sort of like pie in the sky? What's a thing you want to do, or what's another
pie in the
setting?
Sky, or an element of design you haven't had a chance to sink your teeth into? Whatever sounds good to you that you can talk to us about.
Sure. So I'm a pretty heavily, as far as my regular practice in day-to-day has gone, I'm a pretty heavy mechanics dude. So I do a lot of stat blocks, I do a lot of spells, I do magic items, player classes, all that fun stuff. I would like to start stretching into more adventure writing, a little more of the narrative side of things, which I inject a lot of narrative into the mechanics that I design, because I believe that the game is not served if you only do this is pure crunch, this is pure lore, right? They have to inform one another. They're two sides of the same coin, and you can't really separate them, or otherwise, you're missing the point. So I would like to stretch the other side of that coin a little bit. I'd like to get into a little more narrative, maybe some adventure writing, something like that.
Well, I can already tell just based on having you describe how to use monsters that I think I would enjoy those very much. So I hope that will be coming down the pike. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, this was an absolute blast. Thank you for having me on. This is delightful.
Where can people find you if they want to hear more of these insights or just enjoy general RPG discussion talk?
Sure. So we have a D&D studio blog that has started up recently, and you can just find that on our website. And there will be more design talk sort of as the months roll on popping up over there. But if you want to follow me personally, I'm on Twitter at Dan_Dillon_1. Super hiding in plain sight.
And I believe, just because chat would like me to ask on their behalf, do you have a favorite dinosaur?
Do I have a favorite dinosaur? Yes. Probably the Stegosaurus. Because I gotta love it's ever since the Far Side comic where they they had the caveman scientists pointing at the diagram of the Stegosaurus and talking about the thagomizer on the end of the tail,
Yes!
and the fact that the thagomizer is now the actual term for that structure on a Stegosaurus's tail. Amazing.
Truly incredible. Thank you, Gary Larson, for your many gifts. Not dark gifts,
Genius.
just purely good ones.
Pure gifts.
And thank you so much, Dan, for joining us today on D&D Beyond. This was such a pleasure.
Yeah, this was delightful. Thanks so much for having me, Amy. This is great.
We will be back to talk with some more, about some more amazing Ravenloft goodness, and hopefully Dan will join us again at some point in the future when circumstances. But in the meantime, we will let you get back to making more of that game that we love, and we appreciate it very much. Congrats on Ben Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
It's D&D.